To the people involved in the game who have been made to feel unwelcome or unaccepted in the past, I'm deeply sorry to hear of your experiences. Cricket is a game that needs to celebrate diversity on all fronts, because without diversity, this game would not be where it is at today. As a sport, we need to learn from past mistakes and do all we can to make people feel safe and be themselves at every level. I have been an England player since 2011, and I feel very fortunate to have been a part of some incredibly diverse teams and love how everyone has a different story to tell. We must go further and be more inclusive and diverse, because the game I love and the millions worldwide love should be enjoyed without fear of discrimination or judgment, whether that be due to your upbringing, race or gender. As I said earlier, everyone has a different story to tell. I am Ben Stokes, born in New Zealand, a state-educated pupil who dropped out of school at 16 with 1 GCSE in PE. I needed help with the spelling and grammar in this speech, and I am currently sitting here as the England men's Test captain. It is clear there is so much more the game has to do, and as players, we really want to be a part of that to ensure that this is truly a sport for everyone.
It's not just institutionally racist, we say that it's institutionally and structurally sexist and has class-based discrimination.
Cricket does reach communities that no other sport does. How one of our greatest strengths has now appeared to become one of our greatest weaknesses is a tragedy.
A long-awaited independent report has painted a sorry picture of deep-rooted discrimination in English and Welsh cricket and has challenged its governing body to adopt recommendations to transform the culture and structure of the game. You've got the BBC Sports editor Dan Rowan, who is in London. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Sarah.
We've also got Isabel Westbury, the former Middlesex women's captain and now cricket writer and broadcaster, also with us. Hi, Izzy.
Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning. And here with me in studio is John Holder, the first black umpire in English cricket. John, thank you so much for coming into the studio today with us.
Not at all.
Let's start then, Dan, with a reminder of how we got to here.
Well, the ECB decided to set up the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket back in late 2020, Sarah, in the wake of global movements such as Black Lives Matter and Me Too. It was part of an attempt to make cricket more representative and to address allegations of discrimination. Just weeks before the report was commissioned, the former Yorkshire spinner Azeem Rafiq first made his allegations of racist abuse at the club. And those claims then developed, of course, into a full-scale scandal. And the Yorkshire saga undoubtedly spurred on many others in the game to give evidence to the ICEC report. More than 4,000 people, including players, coaches and fans, responded to an online survey, and now, finally, holding up a mirror to cricket, as this 317-page report is titled, has been published.
So what are the key findings then contained in this report?
Well, you have to say, Sarah, it makes for grim reading for anybody involved in cricket. The report found that racism is entrenched in the sport, that women routinely experience sexism, that little or no action's been taken to address class barriers, and that the game was elitist and exclusionary. 50% of respondents said that they'd experienced discrimination in the game, although that figure was much higher among certain minority groups. It found that women were treated as subordinate, that there was scarce provision of cricket in state schools. It refers to a heavy drinking culture that excludes many people, and that the ECB had failed to support black cricket. Cindy Butts chaired the commission, and she gave me some examples of the evidence it received and a warning that some listeners may find some of what she says upsetting.
So we heard some really quite damning and shocking evidence from individuals. We heard of women being constantly stereotyped, demeaned, facing predatory behaviour. We heard from women who are having to walk into school boxes and face signs that say, "No bras allowed." This is 2023, not 1923. What we heard from Black and Asian respondents to our survey was also shocking. Over and over again, in their thousands, they talked to us about being overlooked, about having their experiences and their talents ignored, being deselected. And I'm not talking about individuals who are disgruntled at having and bitter at having not made it in cricket. These are people who turned up with the evidence and said, despite working twice as hard, we are being deselected. Routine use of the P word. A young girl, only 13 on the talent pathway, being called the N word and being told to go back home by grown men. I mean, the incidents were absolutely awful. We heard from a former Muslim player who had to endure the indignity of his teammates laughing and joking about one of the players using the prayer mat to clean up after sex. I mean, the stories were absolutely horrific, and it goes to show that the culture in cricket is rotten.
That's a tough listen. Important, though, to have some examples of the experiences that this independent commission has collected. That was Cindy Butts, who is the chair of the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket. And just to say, if you have been affected by anything you do hear in this podcast, you can visit BBC Action Line. Just go to bbc.co.uk/action line. John, firstly, I'll just get your reaction to that. I know you also gave evidence, didn't you, to this commission? Yes,
I mean, what I just heard was absolutely horrendous. I didn't realise that the behaviour was as bad as it was. That, as what Cindy just said, that is just totally unacceptable.
Izzy?
So I think that it's important that specific incidents are highlighted, and we've seen that. It's almost the shock and awe. But what's really good about this report is that they're not focusing on those. That, yes, they'll make some headlines, but it's looking at actually the culture that meant that these incidents were allowed to happen, or that almost they were, encouraged to happen. And this is, I think, what the report goes into. It's not about just these isolated one-offs. That happens in society for all sorts of reasons. There are bad people doing bad things, but it's about how is it that this was acceptable, whether it be sexism, racism, or indeed, I think one of the big outcomes of this report is the barriers for children in state schools. So I think it's important to have that kind of horrific shock stuff, but I think actually it's about, why was this allowed to happen? How can we change it? And that's what the report's doing.
Yeah, John, and it does look at the wider things, but I wonder, is there an importance of hearing some of those examples to get away from the possibility of denying, when you get into kind of wider terms about structural inequality, of structural institutional racism, when you hear individual accounts like that, is that important to hear those so that you can't deny that incidents like this are occurring? Absolutely,
yes. As I said, I was absolutely horrified to hear some of the details of but cricket, the administration of cricket in England has been very much an old boys club. Wealthy old men years ago started running cricket. The TCCB, the ECB, I mean, they have been able to operate. They made big promises to the public, and then they don't live up to the promises they've made. They've been able to operate almost without any sort of criticism. No one has ever challenged.
John, you were born in Barbados. You were a player and then an umpire in this country for many years. How widespread was racism in your experience?
I must admit that I didn't have any problems. Even when I joined Hampshire back in 1966, I had 7 years there. And we had no problems whatsoever in the dressing room. But I'd heard rumours in my time there that there were certain clubs that had black players, and the black players weren't treated well at all. In fact, one player said that when he joined the first team, for the first few years that he played in the first team, when they played away from home, he wasn't allowed to change in the dressing room with the white fellas. And there's still a lot of white people who feel that black people are inferior. That's the reality. Once people accept that we all have feelings, we all can be hurt by comments. Once that is accepted, then this sort of nonsense will stop. But until that happens, we've got problems.
Izzy, I know that the report also looks at the experiences of women in cricket. You played for Somerset, for Middlesex, for Western Storm and the Netherlands. The report says women are marginalised and routinely experience sexism and misogyny, that the women's game is treated as subordinate to the men's game. Does that tally with your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'll sort of caveat that with I retired in 2017, so we're talking a while back. But certainly going up through the county structure, which was the sort of, I guess, the elite pathway, but below international. I'd play a weekend round in Yorkshire and Lancashire, and you've got a 450-mile round trip, and guess who's going to foot the bill for the fuel? We were, as players. If you wanted to have winter training sessions in the county indoor school, guess what? You had to pay a stipend for that as well. If you wanted to have some kit with the Middlesex Sea Axes on there as well, guess what? You were stumping up for a bunch of that as well. And you were playing at club grounds where you were supposed to be playing on the first team pitch of a Premier League club ground, and but they didn't want you to play on that one because they were preserving the wicket for the men's club game the next day, or it'd been raining or something, and you were shoved into the one literally next to the cows. So this absolutely happened. It has changed a lot since then. Obviously, we've had a professionalisation of the women's game, both at international and underneath that with the regional pathway system. And I think there was always an acknowledgement that change was happening. It was getting better. Sexism was being acknowledged. It was just incredibly slow and incredibly frustrating. And so it's moments like these that you just hope, for goodness sake, will accelerate it. And I'm optimistic. I think it will. I think we've already seen a real intent from the ECB and the actions they have taken. Things like the 100 really have the ability to transform the women's game. And it's are we actually seeing the practical aspects of this? And I think it will. And we can talk about some of the other recommendations that the report makes. But I think in a way, this is a very sad day because it's quite galling what we're hearing. But I think this is a good day. It's a cause of celebration that this has been able to be published so comprehensively and elicit such a reaction from the powers that be. An unreserved apology overnight from the ECB the moment that this dropped. 317 pages. They were the ones that commissioned this as well. The MCC are being forced into response as well. So this is how change happens. So I'm optimistic.
Just a word on the equal pay and potentially some of the changes that they want to make. Because we have seen progression. You mentioned that it's slow, though. England's women's white ball players, they receive a salary that is 20% of a male equivalent. The report is calling for immediate parity between the men's and women's international match fees. I just think of football, and the England Football Association did that back in 2020. It hasn't been done in cricket yet. They're looking for overall equal pay at international level by 2030, equal pay in the 100 in 2025. Do you think that is achievable?
Well, of course it's achievable because you just decide where you want to put the budget.
Is it as easy as that? To prioritise?
Absolutely, because there's been this ridiculous sort of chicken and egg debate where, we shouldn't pay the women the same amount because they don't elicit the same crowds or the same, sponsorship deals, etc. Well, guess what? If you don't invest in the game and you don't give them the training, the facilities, the media exposure, then people don't see it. But what we've seen with the 100 is that if you put it in the same sort of, on the same stage, with the same sponsorship, the same kind of gravitas, yes, people do come. And actually, it's a whole different demographic that hasn't come before. And actually, guess what? You can make a lot of money out of it. And that might not happen in 5-10 years, but it will, the returns will come. And so, yeah, of course, if you want to, you can pay women equally. It's about priorities. And I think, it could happen. It won't happen, I don't think. I think it will happen gradually. But that, in a way, that's okay because it's getting there. And it's just that rate of change that we're trying to instigate here.
Okay, well, let's hear a bit more of Dan's interview now with the ICEC chair, Cindy Butts. How does she want the ECB to respond?
Well, look, the first thing it needs to do is reflect long and hard on what we say in the report. We know that it's been shocking for them to read. It will be shocking for the entirety of cricket to read. But what we're asking for is them to take an honest reflection, to look at what we say, take it in. Do not have a knee-jerk response to what we say, but actually accept the realities of people's experience. And I think I need to really make this clear to cricket and to everybody else who is listening. This isn't just a case of interpersonal discrimination. This is structural in its nature as well. The way in which the talent pathway is inextricably linked to private schools and the way that disadvantages pupils in state schools, whether they're black, whether they're white, whether they're Asian, from accessing cricket and having a fair chance to progress in cricket. They are all issues that need to be addressed and to be taken seriously.
Is English cricket institutionally racist?
We've taken a game-wide approach and we have concluded that it is. And it's not just institutionally racist, we say that it's institutionally and structurally sexist and has class-based discrimination. We have thought long and hard about using that term, but we believe it's a term that applies when you look at the evidence that exists. We don't think it's a term that is misunderstood. In fact, there was an Ipsos Mori poll that was done in 2021, which showed that 7 out of 10 members of the public recognise the phrase and understand what it means. At its simplest, it means a collective failure, and this is the Macpherson definition, a collective failure to provide a professional and appropriate service to people based on their identity. That's not difficult to understand.
Some more powerful words from Cindy Butts there. Dan, I just wanted to ask you firstly, before we go into some of the stats around the class-based system and the elitist side of cricket, how you found Cindy in that interview, because here she is delivering a pretty scathing report on the state of cricket and the culture behind it. And I just wonder, she comes across really well in that interview, but this is not easy to deliver.
No, and I was struck by how eloquently she spoke, Sarah, but you could sense the anger in her voice, couldn't you, and the shock with which she's received the findings. This is a woman who is vastly experienced when it comes to assessing institutions' record on discrimination and inclusivity. She's done a lot of work, for example, with regards to the police force. But she was telling me that this is right up there in terms of the importance of the work that she's conducted, because as we've found so often, and we've discussed this many times on this podcast, haven't we, that, sports institutions are a reflection of society. They offer people a route through which they conduct debates around these issues. And because of the level of popularity that a game like cricket enjoys, not just here, but globally, it's so important that they are scrutinised and that records of those in charge when it comes to making sure that these are a sport for all is absolutely paramount, especially at this time. And, I could tell that she thinks this is a really important piece of work for her. But yeah, as she said, the proof's in the pudding. Holding the sport to account is one thing. The next big challenge is, will it actually address what they want? And there are 44 recommendations, which will come to, you heard the first and most important one, the apology. But there's an awful lot more that we can discuss in a minute.
Yeah, and I know we're going to hear from Richard Thompson from the ECB shortly, but I did want to kind of dig down a little bit more into why it's, still, so based around private schools, about kind of elitist structures around it. One of the stats that stood out for me, 46% of professional cricketers went to private schools, compared to a UK average of 7%. Perhaps less surprisingly, maybe all 18 men of the current first-class counties are male. All but 2 are white. Why do you think it has stayed in the structure and system it is currently in?
So this is something that just routinely surprises me, and we're speaking out about it quite a lot, is this idea that the attributes that make you a successful professional cricketer, your ability to hit a ball over a little rope, have routinely meant that these people that have played professional county cricket, international cricket, are the ones that go in to these positions of power in administration or coaching, etc. So often it's an ex-pro that gets recruited into these positions. And the attributes that make you good at cricket are not necessarily the attributes that make you a good leader of people in administrations, in management, in financial situations, in politics. So by all means, I'm sure there are very good men, white ex-professional cricketers, who are good at these jobs, but we are excluding a whole huge number of people, women, black people, other ethnic minorities, people from state schools who haven't had the opportunities necessarily, or the ability even, to play professional cricket, but who might be incredible leaders in administrative positions. And this is something that I think the report is really important for, because it's quite hard to see that change and to hold those positions accountable, because we can see on our television screens if there's black people playing for England, if they're a woman on our television screens, it's there, it's very visceral. But we can't see really who's making the decisions in the boardroom, or who essentially are the professional club coaches, etc. So I think it's just that it's recognition that we should be recruiting people into cricket. And this isn't just players, this is all of these positions beyond, that don't just come from having played it, which really is, hugely swayed towards white men who go to private school.
John, it was interesting in this 300-odd page report, they were very clear that they wanted to include a chapter on the historical context of cricket and how the game has developed. And I wonder whether some of the things that we're seeing now is the legacy of colonialism and the structures and institutions that were in place and haven't really adapted since.
The administration of cricket was originally from wealthy white men, and it has never been challenged. It's just gone on year after year after year. And that's the reason why we're at the stage that we are now. I was the first black first-class umpire and international umpire from English cricket. But I had hoped that eventually someone with another black person would follow me. And at one stage, there were quite a lot of black young fellows playing English cricket, first-class cricket. And then gradually they started to die out. But the question is why? It's not because they don't love the game. They love the game, but for me there was a drive, or there has been a deliberate drive to get rid of black cricketers from English cricket, and that's come from headquarters.
You think that was deliberate?
Absolutely, I have no doubt.
In what way?
Well, they just didn't, by ignoring the black community when it comes to opportunities for youngsters to play cricket and so on. That's how it happens. If you got no youngsters coming through, no black youngsters coming through the school system here and the club system, because they're being ignored.
Well, Dan, let's get some reaction then from the ECB. I know you've been speaking to Richard Thompson.
That's right. I mean, the ECB was already under scrutiny, Sarah, wasn't it, in the wake of the racism scandal at Yorkshire, but now it's under even more pressure. Yeah, I spoke to the most powerful figure in the domestic sport, ECB chairman Richard Thompson, and I started by asking him what he made of these findings.
Well, I think the first thing I need to do, Dan, is to apologise, and that's the first recommendation that the report made. So I think to those individuals that have been discriminated against, that have been excluded, all of those individuals, the game, the ECB, the game as a whole, owes them a real genuine apology, a heartfelt apology as to the fact that this should be a game for all, and unfortunately this report identifies with the fact that it has not been a game for all.
Apology is one thing, actually tackling it and making improvements is another. How committed are you to doing that?
Totally. I mean, it's the game's single biggest priority now. Given that there have been reports in the past that have not been acted on, this report has to be acted on now. This is a seminal moment in the sense that the game had the leadership in place to implement this change 2.5 years ago when it put together the ICEC report. So this is a report that the game itself commissioned, and probably few sports have ever commissioned a report that has generated this level of interest and also this number of recommendations, which we now need to look very hard at.
The numbers are stark, Richard. 1 in 2 respondents saying that they experienced discrimination in the game. How could it have come to this?
Well, it has come to it, and now we have to deal with it once and for all. There cannot be a repeat of this. When I became chair 10 months ago, I made a very clear ambition, and I set what I believe the bar to be reasonably high, that I felt cricket should be the country's most inclusive sport. I think this report will accelerate that process now. At the time, I said it will probably take us 5 years to achieve that. And I think now we've probably got a bigger hill to climb based on what we've read in this report in terms of achieving that level. But cricket does reach communities that no other sport does. We do reach areas of the country, and the power of cricket is so powerful. How one of our greatest strengths has now appeared to become one of our greatest weaknesses is a tragedy.
Based on the findings of this report and your own experience, Richard, would you accept that English cricket is institutionally racist right now?
I accept the findings of the report as they are what they are, and as challenging as they are the findings of this report.
It makes a number of recommendations, this report. Are you going to act on all of them?
We have been given by ICEC 3 months to review all of the recommendations. There are 40 principal recommendations, probably in total over 100. And in those 3 months, you can't look at any one recommendation over any other. We have to look at them collectively because there's a significant cost. Clearly, we want to look at trying to implement it in as much as we can, as fast as we can. But this report goes further than that, and we need to address it in a way that we will come back with the stakeholders, having consulted with the stakeholders, to agree what our position will be in 3 months.
Although it does say it wants match fees between England's men and women to be equalised with immediate effect. So will you commit to that?
Well, we can't, because that's one of the recommendations that we've been given 3 months to. So, I mean, as much as there be every ambition and we want to do that, there are some things that we've already equalised around gender pay. But I think it's fair to say that we want to go further and faster wherever we possibly can, but we have to look at it collectively.
You mentioned cost, and is that one of the great challenges when it comes to implementing these recommendations? There'll be a limit to what you can do potentially, realistically.
I think it's cost and values. There are certain areas that we need to address in terms of the values that foster a culture, if you like, a culture that has allowed certain levels of discrimination to exist. That's not a cost issue. That's structural issues that can be addressed separately. But in terms of the financial cost of the pathway, gender pay, these issues have a significant cost. Mm-hmm. We've locked our income in with our broadcast partners and principal partners now until 2028, so we don't have a significant amount of leeway between now and then. And with inflation running high, that again creates a problem. But I don't want to use any of that as an excuse. We may need to go beyond 2028. I think the point here is that if we can't implement within a certain time frame, then we need to suggest a broader time frame when we can, rather than saying we can't.
This report will be published on the eve of the Lord's Test in what already looks like an enthralling Ashes series, Richard. How damaging is it, do you think, to the standing and reputation of the game at this crucial juncture? Or do you see it as an opportunity that must be seized?
I certainly believe this is an opportunity to be seized, particularly as the ambition of this game is to be the country's most inclusive sport. So this fits with that ambition. This will enable that ambition, I think, to be accelerated and find an opportunity within the next 5 years to accelerate that level of change so this game can claim to be a sport for all in a way that I believe it is in many areas, but not in the way that it has to be.
The ECB's Richard Thompson there reacting to this report. Izzy, I wonder what you made of that, firstly.
Encouraging. And I think we have seen from the ECB over the last couple of years, change in leadership and a change in intent and really committing to acting. And I know we heard there that the ECB aren't going to say anything immediately because they have been given 3 months, but I think that's right because there is, it's 317 pages long, this report. There are some really fundamental structural things that need to be put in place. Yes, there are going to be, you've got to weigh up the kind of short-term and long-term financial issues that are affecting society, frankly, right now in order to implement them. But yes, I think, I was encouraged by that. I do. And one thing the report does acknowledge as well is that the ECB, they could have surrounded themselves with yes men and women and sort of gone yes, we'll try and change things maybe one day in the near future. But this is damning. But this was ECB themselves. They've kind of put them up to this scrutiny, an independent commission. And so that's the only way that change can happen. And the ECB acknowledges that. And we've seen the first recommendation from the report was an apology. What did we get hours after the report was came out was an unreserved apology. So, I think this is leadership, is acknowledging your flaws and committing to acting on them.
I think it's important to note as well, Sarah, that this does go beyond the ECB in some quarters. I mean, we've referenced the scarcity of cricket provision in state schools, for example. There's a limit to what the ECB can do about that. Yes, Richard Thompson there referred to the costs associated with playing cricket in the grassroots. That's something which they can help with, potentially, depending on finances. But this extends to government level as well. Can they do something to try and ensure that kids at state schools have as much of an opportunity as those in private schools to get on that pathway? One of the other recommendations that Cindy Butts came up with was the scrapping of the annual Eton versus Harrow match at Lord's, for so long seen as something of a symbol of the elitism that exists in the game. Now, there was an attempt to do that previously at the MCC. There was a pushback and it didn't happen. I asked Thompson about that. He said that's for the MCC to decide. Other areas will come under the auspices of the ECB. For example, this idea of an independent regulatory body. This has echoes of what's happened in football, of course. Became statutory, of course, the idea of an independent football regulator. But Cindy Butts told me that if the ECB don't move towards that, then she'd consider recommending that does become part of legislation, just like it has in football as well. So there's no doubt the pressure is on the ECB right now. It's only got a few months to come up with this action plan. It'll be fascinating to see how many of her recommendations end up in that plan.
John, what was your reaction to that?
I was very impressed. In fact, I had heard about Richard Thompson. I think he was at Surrey before, and I'd heard that he was very good at doing what he did, and that he was committed to making things better. And so what he said really was impressive, and I'm looking forward to seeing, but it's not going to happen overnight. But it sounds promising.
Interesting, Dan, within that interview as well, when he was talking about obviously this 3-month window when they go to the stakeholders, because there is potentially an issue where if they want to make reforms, they're going to have to be voted through.
That's right, Sarah, yes. And we've seen in recent history, haven't we, that the ECB struggles sometimes to get change and reforms passed. We had this with the Andrew Strauss proposals to overhaul the county season with a view to improving elite cricket. And there was a rebellion, effectively, within the counties and the memberships of those counties. And the plans got scrapped and they've had to go back to the drawing board. Will the same thing happen here? Well, there's a lot more pressure this time, I think it's fair to say. I think government are keeping a keen eye now on what the ECB does. They're in receipt of significant amounts of public funds, so they have that over them as leverage. And I think the governing body appreciates that it's been a very painful and damaging couple of years, firstly as a result of the Yorkshire scandal and now this. I think it appreciates, certainly Thompson gives the impression that he gets it, that there has to be some kind of radical reform. So we await that with interest. But there was one phrase in the report that really stuck out for me. It said that cricket's relationship with its past stunts its progress. I think that was a reference to the kind of historical association that cricket has with colonialism. It has been over the years a sport relatively resistant to change. And I think this is a huge test for it now. It's enjoying the best of times in some ways. This is a season and a summer to savour, isn't it, for the game, both men's and women's teams involved in Ashes series. But off the field, you can't help feel it's the most challenging of times as well. So there's a lot at stake, I think, right now.
An interesting point there that Dan raises, that a lot of these reforms is not just about chairman of the ECB just saying, right, let's do this, but these have to get voted through, whether it be at the ECB, whether it be at county level, whether it be at the MCC. And that's actually been the kind of impediment to a lot of reform. And it's an irony in a way, because that's what the report is pointing out, is that it's the people in these administrative positions of power that are the ones that need to be changed. So, Turkey's voting for Christmas. Are they going to vote for themselves to be changed? And that is, that's kind of the barrier to some of this happening, perhaps more quickly than, or slower than we would like to. But I think, as Dan says as well, there's now a lot of external pressure that is coming, and this report forms part of that.
John, you were just nodding your head.
Yeah, I agree totally, and I think that the big difference between the opposition to the Strauss changes, recommendations, that is nowhere near as powerful as this is, and the shame and the racism, the misogyny. I mean, I don't think there's any comparison between the criticism that was being levelled by the rebels voting who didn't want to support the Strauss changes, and now I think this is way more powerful than that criticism. I think there's every chance now that they just can't sit back and pretend and ignore it. I don't think that this can be ignored.
Now, one county team that has been trying to address some of the issues highlighted in this ICEC report is Warwickshire. Chief Executive Stuart Kane told us some of the measures being taken to ensure the Birmingham-based club and its staff are more reflective of one of Europe's most diverse cities.
Yeah, we look at it across three pieces. The first is how do we get young players from a diverse community into the game and then get them into the professional leagues. The second is how do we get people to come and watch cricket. And then thirdly is how do we get a diverse range of people to come and work in cricket. So from a player point of view, About 60 to 65% now of our county age groups from 11 up to 18 come from the South Asian communities in and around Birmingham, as well as the black communities. So I think we've made some great strides in getting youngsters from diverse communities into the game. I'm particularly pleased to see much more girls from particularly sort of British Pakistani, British Indian communities coming into the game at a young age. We've done things like the open trial system, so anybody now can try and get onto the Warwickshire pathway by sending in a video off your phone, whereas the old days, if you didn't go to the right school or you didn't go to the right cricket club, you probably wouldn't get a fair chance of becoming a professional player. So I think we've made great strides there. We've still got work to do, but we're starting to get better. In terms of the stands and the atmosphere of cricket, we've introduced alcohol-free areas. We've changed the food and drink that we offer. We've got lassi bars and tea bars now, as well as halal, kosher food options. We've introduced sensory rooms for people with neurodiversity issues. We've got 3 multi-faith rooms around the facility now for any faith, just to come and have times of reflection when they're watching the cricket. So I think we're starting to make strides for people watching the game. And then we're also trying to get more diversity into the offices through apprenticeships. Trying to work with local mosques and local schools to bring people into cricket, because people forget it's not just jobs as cricketers. We need accountants, we need marketeers, we need groundsmen. There's lots of opportunities, and we've said now that we'll employ as much as possible from a 2-mile radius of Edgbaston, because we've got a very diverse range of communities on our doorstep. The time for talking stopped, really. It's about the action now, and I say that it won't happen overnight. It's gradual, small changes, and it is that piece about 3 or 4 years' time. I just want people to go, you know what, yeah, it feels different here. And I think that'll be our judge of success.
It is about the action now. That was Warwickshire Chief Executive Stuart Kane on some of the measures that have come in. And I know that the report also did want to highlight that there have been cases like this where changes are being implemented, that it's not whole scale across the board. They did want to kind of congratulate some of the moves that have been made, and they went to lengths to point them out. John, as we wrap up now, are you confident that this is a moment that change will actually be implemented?
I am delighted to hear the things that I've been hearing. I mean, especially what Stuart has just been saying. But because of what has happened in the past, I think there's going to be resistance to it. But I hope that now, from today onwards, there's a massive change in the whole administration, the whole running of cricket in this country, because it's massively needed. There's been, for too long, too much complacency, and people in high places in the administration of English cricket have been able to get away with a lot of malpractices, really. But now, hopefully, this is a sea change.
It's interesting, Izzy, that word resistance, and it comes up a lot even in terms of, defensive terms came up within that report. And I suppose the legacy is of people who've been through this over 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years and have seen one culture will probably find it hard to believe that can kind of move very quickly to another different culture.
I think the hardest thing in implementing change is acknowledging that you as an individual, or you working in a place that you have done for a number of years, that you love and that has given you a lot, that you're part of that. And that's a very difficult thing to acknowledge and then to act on as well. We talked, my reference earlier, about turkeys voting for Christmas, but I think we need, as a game, as cricket, to have that kind of that bravery, perhaps, I don't know, but to acknowledge that I've heard. I'm sure there are absolute incidents where I might bang on about women, but actually I haven't really thought of it from an intersectional point of view, and thought about state sports, and thought about actually race as well, and the issues and barriers to black women, to women of ethnic minorities. So I thought about me, and that's a very human thing to do. So this is what, again, that's why in a way it's trivial that it's called holding up a mirror to cricket, but it's holding up a mirror to ourselves. And I do have faith in things changing, because I think it was clean bowl racism in 1999 was another report, and the argument is, well, nothing really happened. But this isn't just about cricket here now. We're in our culture, our society is changing. This was launched off the back of the Me Too the campaign, and the Black Lives Matter campaign, and the Azim Rafiq incidents inquiry. John, of course, as well, there've always been independent voices pointing this out and showing that there are still many issues there. But this report has that gravitas. It has a widespread support. It's eliciting comments and intent from the highest powers in the game. So if we can't be optimistic about this, what can you be optimistic about, frankly?